Thank you. I want to applaud all of you. Give yourselves a round of applause for being a part of a discussion this important. And it's important that we congratulate you because without the grassroots organizations and the grassroots organizing that's been happening, the changes that we see as they stand today would not be possible. So it's important that we acknowledge not only some of the newsmakers that we have on this panel and prestigious organizations like the Chicago Urban League, but also community members like yourselves who are informed and active. So again, thank you for all that you do, and thank you all for being here this evening. Yes, we'll start with Sherry. We'll start with Sherry Runner. She is the president of the Chicago Urban League, the interim president of the Chicago Urban League. We want to thank her for allowing us to use this space to host this discussion. She's a native of Chicago, has been active in the city's civic and cultural life, is passionate about the importance of inspiring youth and African American lives, right? Established in 1916, the Urban League works for economic, educational, and social progress for African Americans. And if you know anything about the Chicago Urban League, you know that's not just rhetoric. They put those words into action. When we open up this panel, I want you to give a little more about your background, but also give us a positioning statement about what you think about what we're seeing going on in the city of Chicago right now, and what needs to happen for real systemic change to happen.
I'll be very, very short. I think about this entire time, and I think we've said it over and over again, is this is not just about Laquan McDonald. It's about the practices, the systemic practices of the Chicago police force, the criminal justice reform that we need to see done, and all of the things that flow from that in terms of making our communities stronger. Without our communities strong, this city does not thrive. And when the city doesn't thrive, it will die. And that will mean something to someone at some point. But we must continue to have these forums. We must continue to march. And we must continue to keep the pressure on. It can't stop here, and it can't stop at Christmas time. It has to continue going on. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, I'm a lifelong Chicagoan. I've been involved in trying to make this world a better place for all of our people. I became a Chicago police officer. I rose up through the ranks. I had 5 commands in the patrol division, in the detective division, and in the special operations division. Then I joined the Independent Police Review Authority as an investigator because I had read that there were a number of police-involved shootings, and I was appalled by the number. I wanted to see if all of these shootings were in fact justified. So after a couple of years there, I was promoted to supervising investigator, and therefore I was there for almost 7 years until I was fired recently by the chief administrator, Scott Ando, when I refused to change findings to roughly 6 officer-involved shootings and a number of excessive force complaints. And the struggle continues.
Please put your hands together for Linda Davis.
I'm from the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. The Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights is a not-for-profit consortium of leading Chicago law firms that provides free representation to people with civil rights claims, and also provides free services to not-for-profit agencies. Now, there's 2 things that I think, or that the Lawyers Committee thinks, are particularly important. First, there is a proposed ordinance proposed by the Community Renewal Society called the Fair Cops Ordinance, which would create a police auditor position, which would monitor and which would have subpoena power, have access to all police records, all records of civilian complaints, and would monitor and report on the operations of IPRA, and would put pressure on them to do their job, which they have not been doing in the past. The second thing, obviously, that's crucial is the pending Justice Department investigation of the City of Chicago Police Department. The likely result of that investigation is going to be a consent decree with the City of Chicago calling for systemic reforms in the police department and appointment of a monitor to make sure those reforms are carried out. The job of the community is really to make sure that the lawyers from the Justice Department know what the community's concerns are and that the information they need is provided to them to do a proper job and get the kind of reforms that we want.
Sometimes in the darkness, the light shines brightest. This is one of those times. It is with unmitigated sadness that it took the execution of Laquan McDonald to bring all these things to light. It is with unmitigated sadness that all these wrongs and all the evils that have been done to people of color for years, that have been noted, that have been talked about, that have been reported, and have been ignored, have now come to light. My aunt, Angela Davis, said, "I will no longer accept the things I cannot change. I will now change the things I cannot accept." Thank you.
In my short time here, or in my years here, I've seen scandal after scandal after scandal. And each time I see our political leaders get up, just as they got up now, and it's like the same thing. You hear some heads roll. We're gonna roll some heads, and yes, some heads have rolled. How many superintendents have we had here in the last number of years? How many heads of IPRA or OPS that was before IPRA or internal affairs? The bottom line, and what I've learned more than anything else in my short time here, is that it's up to everybody here in this room, and it's up to young folks and old folks to do the work and to make it happen.
We see these officials see the pressure, right? And then then they start to speak and say what we want them to say, or what they think we want them to say. Okay, the DOJ should have been here a long time ago when Mr. Lorenzo Davis was fired. Okay, because like way before him, right? And so what I see about the city today, my perspective of how we feeling, we're tired. We're tired of listening to Mayor Rahm and there's a quote that came to mind when I think about the task force and all these things that Rahm is pushing, and I believe it's by Audre Lorde, and she says, "We will not dismantle the master's house with the master's tools." All right. And I think we are not going to use his tools to dismantle this clear systemic institutional problem that's been going on in Chicago forever, right? So that's how I'm feeling right now.
Think back to the day well over a year ago when Craig and I first heard the name Laquan McDonald from a whistleblower within the city, close to the investigation, who did not trust the institutions of the city to adequately investigate what we now know to have been the execution of a child on the streets of Chicago. We've spent a good deal of energy over this last year prying loose the evidence in order to tell that story. I have to say, at this moment, I am completely amazed and gratified and awed by what has happened and we've played a small part in. This is one story. This is one story of countless stories that illustrate the same fundamental structural injustices in our society. And I think the challenge going forward, or among the many challenges going forward, is to fully tell that story. We're in a moment right now where the mayor and the power structure in the city have lost control of the narrative. They've lost control of the narrative. That's what we see. We see the news conferences where the mayor can't kind of get his footing and look so anxious. They've lost control of the narrative. That creates space. You know, it creates space for the young people in the street. It creates space for the lawyers, the civil rights lawyers in court, for journalists like us. It creates space to reconstruct that narrative. And I've come to think of this moment, this amazing moment we're sharing, just unprecedented. I didn't expect to see it in my lifetime, as being similar to the sort of truth and reconciliation moments we've seen in South Africa and some other nations making a transition from being one kind of society to being another kind of society. So among the things that I think we all should be demanding, I mean, and now day to day, demanding it from day to day, is that it all come out. That we find out about the other Laquan McDonald's, that we are given the information we need to do the kind of biopsy of these systems that's required to adequately reform them.
Ladies and gentlemen, your panelists for the evening. So we'll go ahead and get started. The first question is a simple one. How do we police the police?
Well, it should be civilian oversight of the police. Right now, that's what the Independent Police Review Authority was supposed to be, but it was inadequate from the beginning. The question becomes, why would you put these guys in that position? Who vetted them? What was their background? And I find the same problem with virtually all of Rahm Emanuel's appointments. The presidents of the school board, he keeps choosing wrongly. The Independent Police Review Authority, his pick was ill-advised. And now you have another chief administrator. Nobody knows how she was chosen. Nobody knows what her background is, except she was a prosecutor. And so you have a prosecutor who perhaps prosecuted some of the very people that might be complaining about police excessive force and misconduct.
But I think one thing that can be done about it is diversifying the police force itself so that they have a better cultural understanding of the communities that they're policing to begin with. So I think that's one piece that we haven't talked about, and as Paul said, when the Department of Justice comes in, we have to shed the light on all the practices that are going on in the police department, not just those that revolve around excessive force, because I think it is a structural problem for the police department completely.
See it. There needs to be immediate accountability for erroneous and false police reports. There needs to be protection for whistleblowers. There are things that can simply, easily be put in place that keeps everybody on alert. It keeps everybody knowledgeable about what happens. And so unless we can go to a higher level and have these things be reported, a place that we can truly have trust in, that we can't have that trust, the transparency helps to shine a light on all of it.
Absolutely, thank you for that.
We've created a public database called the Citizens Police Data Project. If you Google that, you'll find it. And all this material is online. We're constantly gathering more. We're encouraging civil rights lawyers, journalists, citizens who access these documents for their own purposes to pass them on to us. So there's this expanding public resource. And I think it's just important to know as citizens that we have that power.
It's going to be difficult, even if you have the best of intentions, to control police officers because they work remotely. They're not in a headquarters situation where they're immediately seen by supervisors. They necessarily have the power to use deadly force. They have to act with discretion, and they are led often by, or feel they're led by, police union management rather than police management. So that even if you had leadership at the top, which we haven't had, that has the best of intentions, it's a difficult task to control individual police officers at the street level. And so reform is going to have to figure out a way to hold police accountable and solve that management problem. It's just like running a business management problem. Running the police is a serious management problem. And the second point I want to make is, with respect to the Department of Justice investigation, it's not clear yet. We don't know what they're really going to cover. Almost certainly they're going to cover excessive use of force by the police. But they could cover many other topics. Are they going to cover stop and frisk policies by the police? Are they going to cover the fact that there are traffic stops in minority neighborhoods but not in white neighborhoods? Are they gonna cover the question of whether there is racial discrimination with respect to police activities in the city of Chicago? I was reading today the findings of the Justice Department with respect to its investigation of the Cleveland Police Force, and they limited their investigation to the question of excessive use of force. So we need to, if we want the Justice Department investigation to go beyond that, then we're going to have to press to have these other issues concerned and not have it be limited just to the question of excessive use of force.
For one, we need increased Department of Justice enforcement of existing civil rights laws, right?
Right,
These laws exist.
right.
It's not like they don't, some of these laws exist, right? It's that measures aren't being taken for them to be properly enforced. We need the Civilian Police Accountability Council, someone with real power, not that we're just gonna put some input in and like recommend, right? Somebody mentioned like we tired of recommendations. We need someone with real hiring, firing, subpoena, and budgeting power. Like I said earlier, we're not gonna use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house, and Rahm Emanuel's task force is not enough.
We're going to move to the next portion of our panel, where we ask, where do we go from here? What do we want to see as a community when it comes to systemic, to changing what we see? We need systemic outcomes as a result of the release of this video, and how can we make sure that we move forward?
I think there's a danger, we often fall into this, of thinking that somebody's going to come and fix this for us, that there's going to be some person, some enlightened leader, or some, the best possible police chief who's going to come and deal with this. I don't expect that. I think ultimately, it's not so much a matter of finding the transcendent leaders, the great public officials. It's a matter of us as citizens taking co-responsibility for these issues. These problems don't exist apart from us. They aren't in some other space apart from us. In taking responsibility for them, I think we can make even our limited and often mediocre public officials more effective.
There are policies that exist that absolutely need to change in order to see real things happen in our community and give us some real strength. And some policies are simple. Don't shoot to kill. Don't shoot us in the back. Or maybe a simple policy, don't shoot black people. There are things that can happen that are simple and clear, that are policy related, that we need to see and we need to really force in to really see some change happen.
I wanted to comment on the election in March. So black people make up, I believe, 1/3 of the population of Chicago, right? So you use that third plus the allies that black and brown people have in this city. And that is a huge chunk of voters who have power.
And that has been a historical problem in the city of Chicago, low voter turnout, and then people shrug their shoulders like, why is this happening to us? So we need to make sure that this election is more important than any other election that we've had in the past 10 years.
So we need to call on our older men, older women. We need to be more engaged in the process. It's like your vote does matter. You are 1/3 of the population in Chicago. Now with your vote, if you haven't been voting before, that on top of like the people who have already been voting, right? You being more engaged with the people who you are allowing to occupy your space, knowing and understanding what kind of things that they support, what kind of things they've already signed off on, because a lot of these, everybody's not on the freedom side. Everybody's not on the freedom side, no matter what color they are, right? And so as far as like vetting people out, we can't just vote for brown names, Mr. Johnson and Mr. We really need to engage these people, and that can be as little as going to the monthly meeting, right? But we need to make some time to engage some of these officials so that we can, so I'm not gonna endorse anybody today, but I'm saying everybody should go out and learn about what people have already done so they can make those informed decisions.
We need good police. I don't hate police. But what we need, and this is what Jamie, I think, was talking about as well, in terms of it's a police force that is accountable to the people and a police force that work for us, not an occupier, as folks have said. So I guess I envision a police force, or what I hope that we see at the end of the day, is a police force that ultimately serves all of us, and to get there, at least for our community, also for us to do our job that Jamie was talking about, to me, starts with honesty. That's what Jamie was talking about. It starts with honesty. Until, we talk, if there's gonna be any trust, the same thing I would teach my daughters, you're gonna be, with any relationship they're involved in, any relationship of trust is built on honesty. So that means practically, let's just talk practically. What that means is when an incident goes down, when there's a police shooting, when there's a charge of brutality or violation of rights, that you're honest with people. Guess what? Is that novel? Is that a novel approach? We've had for years, and this is the question to really ask ourselves and also ask our leaders and say, how is this working for us? We've had years of denial when something goes down, and Laquan McDonald is a perfect example. I don't want to say it's every day that an execution, even though once a week a police officer in Chicago shoots a person, 75% of the people are black. But I don't want to say that every day what happened, what we saw in this video, happens in Chicago. But what does happen every day is what happened immediately after the shooting. And that's no matter what. Even some of the officers, and I want to say this, the officers who were there ahead of time before Van Dyke got out, they were doing the right thing. They were giving the young man some space. They had a reason to either arrest him or to try to get him help to take him to the hospital, but he didn't pose an immediate danger to anyone, so they followed him. They called for backup. They tried to get some other help on the scene until Cowboy arrives. But what happens after Cowboy arrives and executes the young man is that code of silence from above to below goes completely into effect. And so that's what needs to change. That's what needs to change, and that can change. That means practically, again, it means simple things like, and it starts with leadership, is you protect officers who come forward. I've talked with officers around the nation. I hear stories about officers who've broken the code of silence, have brought about real reform, have done incredible things, and we all owe them a debt. But then I'll talk to a room packed full of officers, and I ask this question, and I've never gotten a hand to raise. Can you tell me, though, a happy ending for an officer who broke the code of silence? I get a lot of happy endings about what happens to the department and that, but no. And we need to protect, not just to protect, but actually to recognize, as heroes and sheroes that they are, we wouldn't be having this conversation if someone from within the city didn't come and shoot. When I read the piece in the newspaper when Laquan McDonald was killed, and I'm sorry, this is true with pretty much everybody in this room, nobody was speaking up. He's a ward of the state. Nobody stood up for this young man. It's something that you hear every single week. So if not for the courage of somebody from within to say, hey, Craig, because I wasn't the hero here, someone who we can't name and we can't even bring out and properly recognize, because if we do, their career would be over, their family might be over, their life would be over. That's what needs to change, and that's the vision I want to see. I don't want to just get rid of police, but I want real police who are good police and who are really serving us. And I want police, though, who ultimately, though, work for us, not us working for police. That's accountability.
Well said, Craig. Well said. That concludes the panel. Thank you for joining us this evening, and remember, not let the conversation end here.